Thanks for joining us, Damien.
Oh,
And
welcome.
it's interesting because you saw my bus and asked what I do as an indie journo, and then you wanted to talk. But let's talk. You got a PhD. What's your PhD in?
I've got a PhD in environmental science from Australian National University. I've got a master's degree from the Philippines in aquaculture, and I've got a BSc from James Cook University in marine science and zoology.
So, what is the attraction to this in the environment?
Um, I guess in particular, I fell in love with the ocean when I was young and wanted to know more about it. Um, I um, I was a very good student, and at my end of my year 12, I wanted to be a writer at one point, and
Okay.
my uncle was a professor in English, and he said, "Don't do it." And I'm glad that I chose science, and that's been my love, and my whole career. I've been practicing scientist for 45 years now, consulting in the Philippines in integrated farming systems for 13 years. 13 years in New South Wales as a state manager for fisheries and on Commonwealth committees for a number of major issues, including biosecurity, which we might talk about a little bit later.
Sure.
Um, and I guess over that time frame, as I mentioned, the Philippines was enormously successful. I showed that, I demonstrated to myself really that, when I was at university at Macquarie in 1996, I think, no, 2000, 1976, we had Paul Ehrlich come and talk to us about the population bomb.
Oh,
And,
yeah, yeah.
that we were going to, the population was going to die of mass starvation in the next 20 years. And I felt very, very disillusioned about the world at that point. But when I went to the Philippines and we had such enormous success with integrated farming, the politics were the problem. As soon as things started to go really well and people got greedy and stuff like that, we had hundreds of families that were working in integrated farms in Negros and
What
Mindoro.
is an integrated farm?
It's combined aquaculture and land aquaculture. So, as an example, the first place that I worked for 5 years as a consultant, we developed, and living there amongst the poor people, that was an extraordinary experience in itself. I thought I knew poverty until I went to the Philippines and the rural areas.
Yeah.
They just switched from, there was a very, very rich family, like all of the Philippines, 18 families own 90% of the wealth in the Philippines. And extraordinarily wealthy was that they had just switched from carabaos for ploughing the sugarcane fields to tractors. And so 2,000 people were kicked off the property and had to go and live on the edges of the sea to fish, because that's the only land that they could live on. And we developed what I worked out there was that one of their major problems in the fish farms, they had 250 hectares of fish farm ponds that were developed for farming milkfish, which is a fish that's a bit like mullet. It's a benthic feeder that feeds on things. Was that the problem was that to get good production, you needed organic carbon. And carbon was the major issue. They were using fertilizers, inorganic fertilizers. And so I developed a least cost linear feed formulation program that was able to produce chicken feed at less than half the cost of commercial feeds. And it was a massive success. And we had massive poultries out on the fish ponds. They collected the chicken manure. Here it's not permitted, but there, given the situation, the chicken manure was dried. We got cattle and put them in feedlots next to the nearby fish ponds and fattened them up using this concentrate plus silage from the sugarcane top. So they cut all the sugarcane. Normally they were burning, and so they cut these, and we built these silos and made silage for the cattle, and the manure from that was used in the preparation of the ponds for milkfish, so that it fertilised, and then you put the fish in, and production increased from a few hundred kilos to 4 tonnes per hectare. All of this is published.
Wow.
And And another one there was they had a sugar mill nearby, and that sugar mill used to release its effluent straight into a big bay, Bais Bay, in near Manhuyud in the Philippines, in Negros Island. And I developed a treatment system within some of the fish ponds to run the effluent through in a sort of oxidative, system using duckweed to strip out the biological oxygen demand, which was taking all the oxygen out of the water, because what was happening every summer when the sugar mill was in operation was that the entire bay would become anoxic. There was no oxygen and all the fish would die.
Okay.
We went out to one of the fishing communities in a very remote area. That was one of the most horrific experiences in the Philippines, and there were people starving to death. There were kids in cardboard boxes, on the side of the village area. They couldn't bury them out there, just at that time, and it was a very serious problem. And this thing was enormously successful. And I remember the manager who was part of the family said, we've had the university coming out here studying this for 10 years and you've solved it in, immediately. And that was another publication, journal referenced publication that I made.
This is the beauty of science, and the purpose is to actually look at this and use science. But we're moving on though, just so you're saying you're doing all this, but this is going to shock the people watching, but you're not actually a believer of climate change.
Oh, no.
Man-made climate change.
No. I mean, right from the beginning, I could see that this was not true. I mean, there's plenty of evidence to show that this is not true. I mean, the historic record on carbon dioxide peaks in the historic record, geological, as well as, lots of other methods that we have as scientists to show this. The CO2 is not a driver of, and that man-made CO2 is not a driver of warming. I accept that there has been some warming in the last 70 years, but or 100 years perhaps, but it's about 1 degree. But there's plenty of information now which is not widely publicized about, say, for instance, how do you measure global temperature, for example? You think about, seasons and the size of this planet and things, but we do have methods now, UAH satellite measurements from that have been in place since 1979, and Alabama University has been and continues to provide monthly reports on the global average temperature changes in all of the sections of the atmosphere. But the lower one is the one that's published most common, but all the records are there, and it shows, for instance, this March and the data is from 1979 to the current period, and they publish this data every month. And if people want to go online and look at this, I can give you the name a bit later. But
sure.
There's a link there, and you can see, for instance, that the mean. If you look at the anomaly in temperature since 1979, it's all in a nice graph, and you can see it yourself that the temperature trend does show that there's a very slight increase over this time, but the average mean is about 0.38 degrees above the mean of that period, and and it's coming down again, and you can see this the spikes and troughs in this over the changes, and that this is another factor in it. I have my James Cook University has got a scientist that they sacked because he talked about the fact that the Australian Institute of Marine Science continued to publish things that the coral reef bleaching was killing the reef, and the UN has come out and said that, condemning us and sugarcane farmers and all these people for destroying the reef, and that climate change was happening and things like that. Well, that's not true either. I mean,
If it's not true and it can be seen, what's stopping other scientists from actually seeing the evidence? Because there are other professors who are sprouting the same thing that you're saying, but you just labelled climate deniers.
Of course.
And you just discarded. How did we get to this point now where, as a scientist, you're literally risking your career by stating the
yes.
facts that you find? It just seems to go anti-science almost. How do we get to here?
Oh, it's a bit like, Paul Ehrlich, and his population bomb. And if you look through history, we've all had, the skies falling in and doomsday. And this has become particularly prevalent since the 1970s in terms of, global warming. And behind it is a much more sinister motivation for this. The Club of Rome and things decided around the time of Paul Ehrlich that we needed to decrease the population. That there are too many people in the world and that it couldn't support the world. And once they lost the argument about feeding the world, politics is the issue for feeding the world. It's not the sustainability of the world. God has given us a very beautiful world in which, with the resources to be able to do it, we have to do it correctly. And that's the whole aspect of my work that has been driven me in science, working in fisheries to try and protect the oyster farmers and the catchments that they work in, that they're the doormat of the estuary in terms of a risk indicator for water quality and things. That was the basis of my PhD. And is that, we need to take a very, measured approach and science informed in terms of how we live sustainably on this planet. You think about, the fact that we had lead in petrol when my kids were young, that that's gone. The water quality in our estuaries and things is far better than it was, that we're addressing issues like particularly sewage pollution and things like that, runoff from agriculture and things like that, have all been massive measures in terms of the huge improvements that young people now don't know because they can't look back on that unless they research this thing. And that we have made massive improvements in how we live sustainably, and we need to continue that track, and that we can do it. I'm confident that we can do that.
I mean, there's a purpose to doing that, whether climate change is real or not. It makes sense to do that.
Sustainability is the issue. It's not about burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels are another resource that God has given us to be able to survive in this world. How could we, in any sense, think about how all the improvements that have occurred since the time that we started burning coal until now.
And are the fossil fuels really fossil fuels? I mean, there's a lot of theories on the net that oil is replenishable. It's like the second largest resource.
No, I don't conform to that at all. No,
so it is a limited resource. Then this is past forests and stuff.
Yes, it is. It's organic matter that has been washed out to sea over, the area that I'm working in, for example, at the moment is the Beetaloo in the Northern Territory, which is shale gas, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But this organic matter is laid down in the seabed and in muds and buried, and it becomes shale. And shale is then pushed down, is buried under thousands of meters of mud and things in sediment, and then through folding and tectonic plate movement and things, they get lifted up, and all these sorts of things that occur. And what we've discovered is that by drilling down what happens is that the shale is the source, the kitchen for producing hydrocarbons. The organic matter matures and becomes hydrocarbons. Kerogen is the sort of source material for petroleum, and shale is a very non-porous rock. It's impermeable. It's much less permeable than concrete, for example. We measure it in microdarcies, which is a measure of the permeability of it, and so it locks it in there. But over millions of years, that oil and gas that's trapped in there leaches up into the because it floats. It's lighter than water in the rock. That it comes up, and if And what's happened in the past, what we call conventional oil and gas, which was that they drill down, and you can see them in Texas and things with the geysers of oil and things like that. It gets trapped in certain places by a layer above it, and that oil and gas is there. We drill down, and it's usually in sandstone or limestone reservoirs, and which are very permeable. And we just, the well just simply, because of the enormous pressure on the earth, this oil and gas just comes up the pipe, and, we reduced oil and gas that way. But in the 1990s, and I've worked with some of the guys that were the original developers of this technology, the Americans, particularly in Texas, decided, as their conventional reservoirs were depleted, that they would go to the source rock, which was the shale. And the inventors, I suppose, of this method was that they worked out that to create permeability in the shale, they could drill down and inject at high pressure a liquid slurry that's made up of fresh water and a gelling agent. And I've made these gelling agents. They're very non-toxic. The gels are a gelling agent at very low concentrations in the water, and inject it into the shale and create a permeability in the shale that allows and they flow the water back. So they inject this water down into the shale, shatter the shale like glass. The fracks, there was a lot of concerns about how high these fracks go. Well, they can probably go 200 meters high if they're lucky. They spread like a pancake across the shale, shatter the shale, and the oil and gas is released, and they flow this water back to the surface, and then they reuse it in the next frac on the next well.
Okay, so the water gets recycled.
Oh, yeah. And and the water that comes back, we've done all the analysis and things in the Northern Territory. I advised the Northern Territory EPA on the development of the code of practice on all of this. The fracs cannot reach groundwater. It's impossible. You could pump an ocean of water in there and we wouldn't be able to do it. Our engineering is only so capable, and they don't want to do that. They just want to shatter the shale. It costs them too much money to pump this. And it transformed the US economy. They were a massive importer of oil and gas when we had the 1974 Iran crisis then, and the Hormuz Strait was shut down. The American economy collapsed, and but since the 1990s, the Americans have gone on to develop this across several geological basins, not just in Texas, up in Pennsylvania and places like that, and has transformed their economy. They're the largest producer of oil and gas now in the world because of shale.
Wow.
Now, shale is in many places. Not all shales are good, but there's many shales. So Canada has now taken up that technology. Argentina's taken up that technology. China's taken up that technology. Brazil's taken up that technology. And very recently here in Australia, we've started to do this. So I was on some of the first fracs that were conducted in the Canning Basin near Broome in the Northern Territory, and with Mitsubishi. And then subsequently, because the Greens shut it down, there was a moratorium because of all these concerns. I went to the Northern Territory and advised the EPA in terms of the development of environmental monitoring and practices, as well as a code of practice in terms of how the industry would have to conduct itself in terms of operations and things like that. There are things like site selection, which is most important for well pads. You don't want to put them in near rivers or any sensitive environmental areas. They don't need many wells. It's not like coal seam gas either, which is a very different industry. This is a very different technology, shale gas. And coal seam gas has got a limited life in terms of the resource that is there. Shale is enormous. And in the Beetaloo Basin, we've got hundreds of years of gas production available there now. And they've proved it up in terms of the appraisal and things to show that this is economically capable. So the major material for it is groundwater and sand. And so there's plenty of sand up there in the
yeah, absolutely. Can I ask though, why? Because all I've been seeing on fracking is all bad. Everything comes on social media is bad. Everyone's saying how bad it is. You see farmers setting rivers alight, saying this is from the shale.
No. That's not true. And those particular ones, well, that was Gaslands, for instance, which was a complete furphy. But there is some evidence of coal seam gas as an industry having some issues in the past, and part of that is that in coal seam gas, which is, if I can explain the technologies, why there's a very significant difference. In coal seam gas, what they typically do, the coal seam is normally less than 1,000 metres, 700 metres, 500 metres, whereas shales are down 1,500 metres to 3,500 metres is usually the target depth. Is that they have to dewater the coal, so they pump enormous amounts of water out of the coal seam and bring that to surface. Now that's salty. And they have to treat that, and they have to run it through osmosis plants, which uses an enormous amount of energy to treat that water, and they use that for irrigation, and the gas is extracted. Now, part of the problem has been with that industry has been that it's lowered water tables significantly because of that dewatering process, and in that respect, there have been some examples of where it has leaked gas into rivers potentially. It's not ever been substantiated because I failed to explain that when this oil and gas migrates up out of the shales over time, most of it is released to the atmosphere.
Okay.
So it's bubbling up in the sea. There's plenty of examples of that. The Eternal Flame in Jerusalem and other things are examples of where oil and gas come to the surface naturally. And so there is some things about that, but practices in the CSG industry, because they didn't start off well. That was one of the big lessons that we all learned. I wasn't involved in that industry. I never particularly wanted to be, because I've got some questions about the sustainability of pumping all that groundwater out. Is that their practices have improved, but very much so. But the shale gas industry, that was where the opportunity was for me to go to talk to the NTEPA and the industry and say, this is how we're going to have to do it. And one of the very first things that we had to address was the issue of polluting the water. And so I developed a very specific intense monitoring program, groundwater monitoring program. So when they drill a well, we say this is the well, we insisted that they have groundwater moves, so groundwater moves through in a direction downhill to the sea eventually. And so we talk about in environmental science, control and impact monitoring, and or before and after, and so before the pipe and after the pipe, for example. And so we insisted that they, in the preliminary guidelines, which people can look up, and groundwater monitoring in the Beetaloo in the Northern Territory, we developed a program in which they had to put in a control bore upstream of the wells and an impact monitoring bore directly downstream of the bores and within 20 metres of the well. Now, that was a bit controversial with the industry. They said, it's going to interfere with our drilling and things. I said, well, if you want to prove to the public, and particularly the traditional owners, you're going to have to put this in very close to the wells to show that there is no impact. Because, and again, I haven't quite explained, but the fracs cannot go up from the wells except via the casing, and a rupture in the casing or some failure in the well integrity. And although the engineering controls for fracking are enormous, they've got pressure triggers on the casing when they're pumping, and the pumping only occurs for a few hours. That's the time when a potential well failure could occur because of the pressure that's involved. There's 10,000 PSI going down down the well. They have 20 trucks, big trucks pumping on a well
and
site.
that's just to smash up the shale.
To shatter the shale to bring it up with this slurry sand.
So can I ask, how much shale oil does Australia have?
Oh, centuries and centuries. The Canning Basin and the.
So we could have really cheap.
Absolutely.
And all economies, the ones with the cheap energy, are the ones that prosper.
Of course.
So we've been held back by the Greens in these arguments that it's bad and that climate change is real. So you're saying climate change isn't real. Why are we here? Why can't we have these debates on 60 Minutes, on ABC? I mean, it always seems to just be vitriol.
Yeah, well, I've appeared on a number of ABC programs and things in the 2000s when James Price Point was a big controversy, and we with Mitsubishi were there developing this pilot project at Nookambah, which then the TOs, their traditional owners, when I explained everything to them, lived out there with them in the community for 6 years, got the young fellas, women and men working on the mine site and everything like that. We put over $1 million a year into employment out there and things like that till it all got shut down. Because of the way the land councils are set up and everything else, they had their own independent. Nookambah is famous because they originally opposed with Charles Court. They opposed a drilling well there. People look that up historically. There's lots of photos and things about that. Now, I met the traditional owners that were there at those protests and things, and I was able to, with Mitsubishi and other people, but particularly myself, was able to take them through the science and things like that. And a lot of the work that we put up in terms of the environmental management plans and things like that were peer reviewed by several universities for different traditional owner groups, and they all agreed that what we were proposing there was a okay thing. But Nookambah itself said, we trust you, we want to work with you, this is good communication, we understand the science, we want jobs. That's our biggest problem for our community, for our young community. But, the Greens won the day and the government decided that they put a moratorium in place on that. And so
what do you think their argument is, though? I mean, is it just the misinformed, or it's climate change has now become like another religion, like vaccines are religion, trans is religion?
Both things. It's the total misinformation about hydraulic fracturing. And,
and yet the government would say that this was misinformation.
Yes, of course. And the ABC would say that as well.
Yeah. So the question is, why do you think? Is there, I don't know, is it just people believing that there's a purpose to them, they're saving the planet from us, or?
Yeah, well, I think that that there's also a terrible sort of self-confidence in human capacity, to be able to produce energy. The idea, I'm not against renewables, but they're very limited. They cannot provide baseload to our modern societies anywhere in the world.
Because we've done interviews. We actually had a Facebook page, over 100,000 followers, and we interviewed a woman called Alex who said the turbines are a scam.
Oh, yeah.
And that they took it down.
Yeah. Well, environmentally too. I mean, the turbines are a catastrophic impact because they're developing them on ridges. And they are no-go areas for any other type of environmental development. They are extremely important niches for all sorts of animals, particularly birds, raptors and things like that. So you look around Canberra now and I just cannot believe that they've got these, bird choppers essentially up there. And a lot of that information is not published. 90% reduction in raptors. They cannot go in those areas anymore or they're killed.
So that's official because 90% reduction in raptors.
Raptors, within wind turbine areas and things like that.
Which you think would have the Greens up in arms.
Yeah, but no. And the fact that they're allowing this massive land clearing, because they've got to take these enormously long, turbine blades up these roads into these hills and things. The land clearing for each particular wind turbine is just unbelievable. And compared to let's compare it to a shale gas well. I've done these numbers quite a long time ago, but you need about 2,000 turbines to produce what a single horizontally drilled shale gas well will produce in the Beetaloo, 2,000 turbines. And, solar's even worse.
Solar's worse?
Yeah.
And why is solar worse?
But simply because of the absolute land clearing, that they need. And it's sort of, sure, they've got pictures of sheep walking around solar farms and things like that, but there's no way that, that's going to provide a sustainable load. We talk about base load. Well, the sun shines for so many hours a day and the wind blows. And so I think there's been many studies published a long time ago, particularly in the UK and things about this, that, probably the maximum sustainable, integrating into a system is about 20% solar. So I'm not against solar on roofs and things like that, but I still have an issue about, what is the end point? And I always think in industry about what is the end point for the waste that comes out of this. Now, none of those blades can be recycled. Those solar panels cannot be. The other aspect is, of course, storage. So, when the wind doesn't blow and when the sun doesn't shine, well, then what are you going to do? They've got, some attempts at, pumped water, and that again causes, look at the Snowy River project at the moment, which just exploded in terms of cost and the environmental damage that occurs from that sort of thing. When they pump this water up into these dams and then bring it back down again when the sun doesn't shine and they need power, then what you're left behind is, it's a lake when it's full, but it's a dry bed and it takes up a huge land. So you've got dust issue, you've got all these other aspects of it. And again, you've only got, a limited capacity for doing that. So then they turn to batteries, these massive batteries that they are building associated with these plants. And they themselves have got enormously inherent dangers. People probably don't know that they've got 6-foot concrete walls around these battery things because they can explode, lithium runaway.
And then they won't, you can't put the fire out once they...
Yeah, and then what's the storage capacity of those giant batteries? Well, I think in Adelaide, for example, I think it's like 20 minutes maximum that they can supply energy. So you haven't got...
So you've only got 20 minutes.
Yeah, so you've got
just enough to put out a warning that you're going to lose power.
Yeah.
So here we are in this incredibly odd time on the planet where the way you're talking is that we're actually, in a bid to save the planet, we're sort of actually damaging it.
Oh, absolutely.
So it's everything's upside down. And here we have this shale oil, which I've heard, I don't know if it's true, but it's easier to process than it is pulling the oil out of the ground. Is that true, or is that another furphy?
No, that's true. Well, in the Beetaloo, it's gas because there is no oil. I mean, the oil window is, and there are shales that will produce oil, and I'm not entirely sure. I think the Taroom Trough, there's hope that there is oil there as well. So you can get oil from them, but in the Northern Territory and in the Canning Basin, there is oil there. That's conventional oil in the Canning Basin, for example, and in the Kimberley and in the Amadeus Basin in the Northern Territory. But we're not producing much oil in Australia, onshore in Australia at the moment. It's all gas. The same here in Perth, in the Perth Basin. Mitsui is doing the gas that's being provided to Alcoa and everybody else while they shut down the coal-fired power stations and all of that. So and coal is the base of our energy. Has been for over a century.
What are your thoughts on the coal? Because they're saying it's the coal that's destroying the atmosphere.
No, coal. And again, coal is coal-fired power stations. Again, huge improvements in terms of the emissions from coal-fired power stations, but the emissions are sulfur dioxide and NOxes, nitrogen oxides, and things like that. Now and particulates, and they've massively improved those power stations now. So Mount Piper, for example, which is going to be supposedly closed down in New South Wales in 2030, but how on earth is the government going to keep shutting down those massive power stations? Coal is still, 50 years or 30, 40 years ago, coal provided 70% of the global energy requirements. Today, coal provides 75% of the coal energy.
This is all around the world.
Yeah. So it's increased, and because it's cheaper than gas, it's cheaper to produce, it's cheaper to put in coal in power stations.
And we have huge amounts of coal.
Massive. And so what do? Well, we export it all to China and other countries, which still, and India, you know, who are massively increasing. I mean, I think China, for example, builds the same number of power stations we have in Australia every month or every 6 months or something like that.
Yeah.
And they have their green, you know, sort of agenda as well, because none of them want to get into the politics of denying it and being condemned by, you know, the Western countries in particular. But you can see what's happened in, for example, Germany and the UK. They've destroyed their economies because they've switched away from fossil fuels and nuclear. They turn to, and again, you know, the genius Germans, for example, can do all, you know, supreme in technology. We're going to do all of this, and they've completely deindustrialized the country, and it's in ruins economically. The UK is the same, and we're on a similar path. We're just a few years behind in terms of waking up.
But we're going to get there.
Yeah, we will. I mean, unless there's a change in course, and I'm hoping that this is now going to happen. I mean, I think part of this terrible war that's happening in Iran has got people suddenly saying, where am I going to get my petrol? And the reality starts to strike at the hip pocket and in the families and everything else, that this is what we are, and that industries are shutting down. Alcoa's shut down, Perdaman shut down their fertiliser plants in Australia. We have to import all of that. Farmers can't get fertilisers now.
It's completely dependent on the rest of the world.
Yeah.
When we've actually got the resources here, we should be thoroughly independent.
And one of our biggest, I think it's our biggest export earner is, or iron ore's one, but is coal. And we ship it all that overseas. So it's okay to burn it overseas.
Yeah.
But and we'll import back the solar panels and whatever, steel and everything else that we need in our industry, in our economy and things like that. But we're not allowed to use it here and burn it in power stations. So I'm absolutely not anti-coal. I think that good power stations can be built now, and that is a tremendous source of base load. But the other one, they call this. So what's happened is that they call gas now the bridging fuel that will be able to transit from a fossil fuel economy to a green economy by...
And do you think that green economy is achievable?
No, and we'll prove it to ourselves if we don't, you know,
So it's like what the Germans have realised they can't achieve it.
Yeah.
And now they're...
Well, they've switched back to coal. You know, and the UK is undertaking massive redevelopment of their offshore gas fields and things like that, because they realise that their economy is not going to be sustainable with, you know, relying on, you know, wind farms on the coast and in the sea and things like that, which also have their massive impact on marine life and things like that.
Because the building in WA here, they want to put huge turbines in the ocean.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, I mean, the dredging and piling and the noise and all the other things. I mean, it's incredible that this is all, again, like the ridges where they put the wind turbines and things like that. These are highly sensitive environments that, you know, we really need to, shallow offshore areas that we you know, we need to look after. And these sorts of things have got, you know, limited lives. They've got very limited production capacity, as I say, you know, 2,000 wind turbines compared to a single gas well. And, you know, in the shale gas industry, I forgot to mention, you know, well pads, for example, and normally, you know, 5 hectares each.
Yeah. And
on those 5 hectare areas, they can put up to 15 wells. And 15 wells in that footprint.
And every one well is 2,000 wind turbines.
Yeah.
So and it's enormous.
And they drill out. It's, I think the longest lateral that we have in the Beetaloo now is 5 kilometres. So
that's 5 kilometres sideways.
Yeah, in the shale. So they go down and then drill sideways in the shale, and that's what they frack, is that shale window, and that's where they get their gas from. So the well pads that you require for a massive production are 5 kilometres apart, you know, and you have a road in, not like coal seam gas, which is single wells dotted all over the place. They're the sort of nightmare sort of photos that were produced in the old days about how they did that. So it's a much less dense sort of land clearing requirement for shale gas as well. And all of these sorts of technologies have been developed in the US and we've brought that technology here to Australia. We've learned from their experiences and their mistakes. We've put in a code of practice. We've put in, all of the sort of monitoring requirements for drilling waste and chemical risk assessments for hydraulic fracturing fluids and things like that, which show that they're organic material that breaks down very quickly in the tanks when it comes back and then is reused and things like that. The tanks, the water itself is not toxic. I mean, the chemical risk assessments, which viewers can look at online in the Northern Territory under the Department of Land, I don't know its latest name, the Department of Environment, where I used to work, show that these chemicals are non-toxic. The only one that is potentially toxic is the biocide that they use in the drilling water. And we're talking about, the total amount of chemicals in the fluid that goes down is much less than 1%. So it's a very, very, very low concentrations. And most of that is these gelling agents that they need to suspend the sand in to get it into the shale.
Okay.
And the only one that is a sensitive one is the biocide that they use. But the biocide that they use is used in air conditioning systems and in all sorts of things to manage microfilms in aquatic environments. It's non-toxic to people. It's equivalent to the toxicity of salt. It doesn't affect fauna. The tanks where this water are open. There was concern about birds, but birds could drink this to their heart's content if they wanted to. But as I say, it's somewhat salty. It's about a third the salinity of seawater when it comes back.
All right, yeah.
So it's slightly salty, but there's been no interaction with birds. There's no toxicity there. But this particular biocide, it's very important that they keep this out of the aquatic environment. And so the controls are all around that. It will biodegrade. It takes a couple of months, to get down to disappear. But none of it is what we call persistent, bioaccumulative or teratogenic. So none of the chemicals are. And the CSIRO, and there's lots of published studies about this now, about the toxicity of this and of these fluids and things like that. So we know that that's not toxic. The drilling chemicals are not toxic. We make sure that they are very strict in the code about when they drill through the aquifers, that they're not using anything that can impact the aquifers. And because they've got those monitoring bores right there, we can get them to show, and they have to do this monitoring every 3 months. And they've done this since 2019, that there is no change in water quality at all.
So the other thing we're doing by pushing climate change, you're not allowed to debate it. Any scientist that stands up gets cancelled. They use the argument that 97% of all scientists agree with man-made climate change, which I've seen some other woman maybe on social media coming out and said that's from an old study that's been disproven.
People are afraid. That's all.
But what I'm saying is, as an older generation, we're just offering the next generation hopelessness.
Yes, exactly.
Saying just by being yourself, you're destroying the planet, and the only way to survive is to endure a far less lifestyle that is far beneath the one we're having now.
Yeah, maybe back to the 16th century.
16th century.
Yeah.
And so we've got this. Well, in actual fact, thanks to science, because we show the science, trust the science. Thanks to science, we can actually go the other way, have a cleaner country, and have all the power we need.
Very much so. And but as I was saying to you earlier, and before we started this, that when I was in the Kimberley, one of the things that we did was that I went out and gave presentations at the schools throughout the Kimberley, from kindergarten up to high school, and at universities here in Perth, in Sydney, and in Broome and other places, on what fracking was all about. And I remember the teachers always used to say to me, young Johnny, he's going to be a problem, so we'll take him out when he starts to make too much noise. Every one of those classes, the kids were just absolutely enthralled with the presentation. It was too popular, of course, and so the ABC and the Greens got it all shut down. And that, I could no longer talk. Now up in Darwin, the same thing occurred. That the very good friends with the principal of a Catholic school there, high school there, they wanted to get me to come and talk. But because the curriculum now across the country and all Western countries. We followed the UK and the United States. Were able to, enforce this limited information so that the children.
So the children can't hear both sides.
Absolutely
They
not.
can only hear the one side that's
absolutely
real,
not.
even to their detriment, to their hope, their future. That's why they're saying they don't want kids, because they think the world's going to perish.
Yeah.
And so we're like one of the first generations that just offers hopelessness to the next generation instead of hope.
Yeah, and and it's very dismaying. I mean, the ABC
What do
is
you
one.
think's driving behind that, though? Why would they do that?
Because they believe that this is true. Because they're not scientists. They don't look at the information that is buried in all these things I mentioned earlier, about global temperature averages from satellites and many other historic records. There's a wealth of information out there, and they're very, very senior scientists. They've all been shut down.
Yeah, have
all been shut down. I mean, for all these, problems, President Trump has been very much against all of this, and you can see the reaction in the world. I'm not talking about Iran, but about fossil fuel industry, and he sees that as the the absolute foundation of the US economy, and he's right. I mean, and there's no denying this, but. People get stuck on these issues of CO2, that burning fossil fuels has added all this extra CO2 to the world. Well, there's no demonstration of that. I think the estimate is probably, it might be 2% of the additional CO2. If you see the pastoral burning up, for example, in the Kimberley and across the things, the amount of CO2 that goes out from there is just enormous. They say, oh, well, the grass grows back. But, this is all just arguments.
It must be quite frustrating for you as a scientist to go, look, here's the evidence. And you can't actually have scientific debates instead.
No, you get no platform for it. Of course not. You're not. You're completely removed from any of that.
You're a climate change denier.
Yeah. And so, I suppose even for this interview, am I taking a risk? Well, I'm 68 years old now, and my career's, I'm still working in the industry, absolutely, and I want to make sure that the industry that's developed in the Beetaloo and elsewhere, if I'm involved in those projects, is developed properly in environmental science, so that it is done correctly.
And I take it you're a grandfather or a father.
Yeah.
And we have a duty as human beings to leave hope.
Yes, that's right.
I feel that's what we're obligated to do, because we're seeing kids in despair.
Yes, absolutely. They've all lost hope.
I interviewed a 16-year-old girl. She came with her father to do an interview, and she was convinced climate change was going to destroy the planet.
Yeah.
And then when I said, what about all the minerals we have in the ground? She'd been all through a very good school. She had no idea Australia was minerally rich. She didn't know what I was talking about.
No.
And when I asked her, what do you think about the scientists who disagree? She never heard of them. She said, oh, I believe Greta.
Yeah.
And that was it. It was an emotional decision. But the other thing, just going to another thing you're doing, you were on the Commonwealth Board of Biosecurity. How did you end up there, and what was the role of that?
Okay. So I was, as I said, the state manager and a state representative for on the National Biosecurity Committee, and then from I think 1996 until 2002. And that was about biosecurity measures. Biosecurity being importing stuff and control of outbreaks of anything from blue-green algae blooms in rivers and what's happened in South Australia and things like that, through to viruses. And I was saying to you when we first met that when I was on the National Biosecurity Committee, we had he was actually we had senior research scientists, including from CSIRO, on that committee, and I went to the Geelong CSIRO lab where they were working on viruses. Went there, we got in moon suits, but we didn't go right inside the central lab. But we were able to see all the biosecurity measures and things like that. Well, Brian was his name, from WA, and he said, our biggest biosecurity risk in the world now is the the availability of off-the-shelf kits to be able to do gain-of-function research in viruses, and that any lab virtually can get access to these things and develop gain-of-function, which is, do you want me to explain gain-of-function?
As far as I know, gain-of-function, the theory is, oh, look, we'll take a common virus, which most of us are immune to, and we'll develop it to see if we can make it more fatal.
Yes, that's right.
In the way that if we do, then we'll, if it happens, we'll have a vaccine ready for it. But it seems mental, to me.
And that's right. I mean, you know, scientists being scientists, they're very narrow in their focus, and we're going to chase this down. You know,
the funding is there as well.
And the funding was there. I mean, the funding came from, as we found out with Wuhan,
from Fauci.
Lab, you know, that came from the US, and Australia was involved too. CSIRO was advising on their biosecurity at Wuhan lab.
At the Wuhan lab, the CSIRO.
And they had failed them in terms of their previous audits before the outbreak that occurred.
What do you mean they'd failed them?
Because their biosecurity measures weren't appropriate. So there's reports that, you know, I mean, they're documented reports, and we won't find them easily, but, you know, that Wuhan lab itself had been, so CSIRO had a key role in terms of developing biosecurity measures at that lab.
So the CSIRO knew they were developing or doing gain-of-function work on COVID.
Well, yeah, we call it COVID now, but on various viruses.
On coronavirus.
Yeah, on coronaviruses, but various other viruses.
Coronavirus, as far as I know, have been with us since the caves. I mean,
yeah. And they developed these much more lethal viruses and things like that to be able to, you know, then develop vaccines. I don't...
Can I just pass something? As far as I know, and if I'm wrong, I'm happy to be wrong. A successful virus is one that doesn't even make the recipient sick. It just sort of lives in and spreads.
Yeah, we've got many viruses in this right now that do
and one that kills us is like a new virus that hasn't adapted to actually living in harmony with us.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the nature of evolution in viruses and bacteria, that if it kills, then it kills the host, then they can't reproduce. And so
they die too.
And so what happened, I think, with Wuhan, and before I say that, I don't ascribe to the idea that there was some sinister sort of bioweapons development.
But we are playing with dangerous stuff.
Very, very dangerous stuff, and highly, because they can develop these up to very, very contagious sort of levels that unless they've got very strict measures in, and, you know, you can't, you know, because they are so lethal that, you know, those things have to...
The potential for it getting loose is real.
And so in Wuhan, I think, and if you talk to Brian later on, you'll hear about, he's got actual stories of a guy that was in China that during the time that COVID first broke out, which is, we believe, somewhere in, I think it's from memory, middle of 2019 or late 2019. And, you know, there's even evidence that, you know, it came out because Wuhan lab is above a railway station, you know, a central railway station, and that workers from the lab became infected and went to the markets. And that's where it first started to be impacted. Now,
they might not have known they had it at the time.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And just take it out.
Yeah. Well, there was a famous doctor that was working there that died of it early on. There's a YouTube video somewhere early on where he was telling the world that this virus was out there and that it was highly lethal. And as you say, you know, that's the nature of viruses. I mean, the Spanish flu was an example as well, you know, back in the First World War.
Let's talk about the vaccine then, because you took it and you've had a reaction. You ended up in hospital after you took the vaccine.
Yeah, well, I because I was working in government, I had to take it. Yeah. And I had my first injection, and I had a very adverse reaction to it. I had to go to hospital, you know, within 24 hours of getting the vaccine. And I was only there for one night in emergency department. I had the worst flu I've ever had in my life. And so that was my adverse reaction. And it took me quite some time to recover. But, you know, I'm a relatively healthy person. I don't smoke, you know, exercise. I don't drink alcohol. I don't have any major illnesses and things like that. So I'm a healthy man, and I took it with a risk because I knew that vaccines,
Were you concerned about the mRNA as a scientist about the mRNA technology?
Well, the vaccines in general that were developed for it, because they were all done so quickly. The industry for vaccine development has been with us for 50 years or longer, and that the regulations and controls in terms of development of vaccines and the testing that's required before they're introduced to people and the market and things like that are very long extended periods.
10 to 15 years.
Yeah, but because of first of all, because of the enormous mortality that was occurring in China, they were digging mass graves and everything else when the virus was in its early generations of development. The lethality was enormous. But they dropped off quickly, and within several generations.
So when you say it dropped off, is that because the Chinese got immune to it, or the virus realized?
Yeah, happens in all.
So the virus is evolutionary and clever enough to go, hey, we're not working here, we're killing the hosts.
Yeah.
And so the virus itself adapted to us.
Yeah.
So we get immunity to the virus, but at the same time, it's trying to meet us almost.
Yeah, well, the virus is not as lethal. It becomes much less lethal. So I think the initial...
So the virus is trying to be less lethal for it to survive, and our immune system is kicking in for us to survive. So
yeah, it's a sort of coexistence.
It's almost like a symbiotic. Wow.
Wow. Yeah, exactly. And this happens over and over. I mean, the reason that we get flu are the different flu strains that are being generated each year. A lot of them seem to come out of chicken farms in China, I must say, and things like that.
I've heard that too.
But that we develop immunity to them, and generally the idea that a virus suddenly appears out of... Anyway, Spanish flu is an interesting one. They're not sure about it. It was in Indian populations, and it got into the American soldiers, I think, first, and things like that. But we haven't had those sorts of things. So this sort of laboratory developed gain of function research that was, had such massive, issues with it in terms of the availability of off-the-shelf methods to be able to do this in laboratories and things has been enormous.
And we can't debate, we can't debate climate change. We can't debate vaccines. It's just like safe and effective.
Yeah.
And if you debate it or you don't take it, you're an anti-vaxxer, and again you're cast out. How have we got to you've been scientists all life, how has science got to this point? Has it been bought by the corporations because they want to use it as a tool to sell product, or what's actually happened that because literally we come from what's the great scientist with gravity, Newton. We pride ourselves on science as this is how we've progressed as a species. And now we're almost becoming anti-science because we're not following scientific principles.
Well, in my job in New South Wales, for example, I was very closely connected to the minister's office in terms of, and ministers, I dealt with the huge issue in Sydney Harbour in terms of the pollution there from Union Carbide in their Agent Orange stuff that was left there. And, we've got, nobody really knows about that now. This was around 2005 that, that Union Carbide was producing Agent Orange for Vietnam and also for
the Vietnam War.
Yeah,
for choose against it.
In the 1970s.
And what they were putting...
They were producing it, and I was at a high school.
But their stuff was going into the...
Well, I'll tell you a quick story there then, because this is a funny one, but not funny. But Union Carbide was at Homebush Bay. They had their plant there producing Agent Orange, and these dioxins that are associated with them were unknown then, of course, and so they were spraying that in Vietnam. You can go there and see all the disabled, places where people have been affected by Agent Orange. Hey, dioxin is one of the most toxic chemicals humans have ever developed. And
we developed it.
Well, it's in this combination of things that they produced in Union Carbide, very effective at defoliating everything, but, leaves these long-term massive legacies. Now, Union Carbide at the time in the 70s, I was at high school. I was in the conservation group, and we went around there and did a protest, which the ABC, I think, filmed with flags and things, because what Union Carbide was doing was drums that were leaking they'd put out in the mangroves, and built
Oh,
this
my Lord.
sort of thing there. And, you know, they were putting all these drums there. The fisheries officers that were around at the time told me that they had observed all that as well. Now, in 2005, I think the EPA was doing some analysis of Union Carbide packed up and left in about 1980. It's all a curious thing, and there was a lot of legacy dioxins that were discovered and other things that were in their land site, but they had a massive cleanup, which I don't think they paid for. And
So we paid for it.
yeah. And you know, it's a bit like what happened in Bhopal, different, you know, with Union Carbide there. They didn't have a good track record in other countries, but they went and sampled prawns that were in the Homebush Bay and came back with and I was put on an advisory committee with specialist scientists from around the world in terms of advising the government on what to do about this. And I remember one of the key scientists said to me, Damien, these are the highest measurements of dioxins in seafood anywhere in the world.
Oh, my Lord.
And I remember going and telling the minister, we have to shut down the fishery in Sydney Harbour. He said, oh, can't we just shut down Sydney, you know, Homebush Bay? It was Eddie O'Bede, by the way.
Oh, yeah.
And I said to the minister, you know, unfortunately, fish swim. And, you know, so
I noticed that.
I was then sent up to Orange, where our headquarters were, to talk to them about what we were going to do. And in the meantime, the Sydney fish markets had got wind of, you know, what was going on, and they announced that they were not going to buy fish from Sydney Harbour anymore. So the whole thing became a fait accompli. Now, we went on and did further sampling in Homebush Bay, and they also interestingly went over and sampled in Garden Island, and Garden Island had also extremely high levels of dioxins. Now, what was happening?
Well, they were shipping. Ordinary Australians are eating this. They're catching this fish and eating it.
And I'll get to that in a minute, but we've discovered at Homebush Bay, in Garden Island, that there are also extremely high levels. And since then, I've worked out that, you know, what we were doing was that they were loading these drums onto warships in Garden Island and taking them to Vietnam, and obviously there were leaking drums and they just dumped them in the bay.
Oh, my God.
Now, dioxins last for hundreds of years. And, you know, I know they closed the fishery down. I'm not sure exactly of the status now. I haven't kept abreast of all of that. But, you know, that essentially, in spite of all of the other magnificent things that were done in terms of water quality in Sydney Harbour, the dioxins remain there.
Bit of a problem. So they're still there?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. How do you clean up a seabed? Yeah. And so, you know, and another nasty story in that, when I was working in the Kimberley with the traditional owners, you know, there was a family of 4 men, and people can look this up too, you know, Aboriginal men. And 3 of them had died of cancer, and the 4th one, Lolga was his name, he's passed away now too of cancer. They had a program there, which was a green group that got them to go out and spray a particular weed that was out there as problematic, and they used Agent Orange. At the time, they didn't know. Lord. This was in the 1980s, and Lolga said to me, you know, we all ate our lunch on top of the pesticide tank. We didn't know that this was what's happening. They got no compensation for this. They died directly because of that contact with Agent Orange. It's a terrible, terrible story. So, you know, I guess that's an example of a digression to something that we're talking about. But again, it's
in our nature to do this and forget it and redo it again and forget it. Can I ask, right at the moment, just I think is enough here for another interview. You're up for it, but just to sort of round up this one. At the moment, we have turbo cancer, which we've never heard of before, and people are dying within weeks of getting turbo cancer. The immune system, autoimmune disease is rife. We've been talking to scientists like Gert van der Bosch, who's talking about how humans now are creating the variants within them as the virus is trying to escape or get past the spike protein within them. Is this of your belief too, we're seeing, or what do you think's happening from a scientist's point of view? Have you any idea why Australia's death rate is going up. We've got the highest rate of cancers now in the world. That was the latest thing that came out, 426, I think, per 1,000 or 10,000. What are your thoughts on this?
Though I think I don't agree with all of what Robert Kennedy talks about as the health chief over in the US. I agree that a lot of it is related to diet. I think really that a big problem is that people are eating enormous amounts of processed food. I think Australians are 50% of their food intake now is processed, highly processed foods, and I think that is our bodies are sacred temples, and that we need to look after them, and that all these very foreign sort of artificial food ingredients and things like
How
that.
How about the sprays on the wheats and this? Because I have friends now getting leaky gut, which I've never heard of. There's lots of people going with that, and gut issues and stuff like this. Is this?
Yeah, Roundup is a very, or what's it called? I've forgotten the chemical name of it. Glyphosate. Yeah, so glyphosate. But there's been many studies about its effects, and it's accepted now. But the thing, and again, when I was on the biosecurity committee and with TGA and things like that, is that there's very specific label use of these pesticides and or herbicides, I should say. Pesticides are a different issue. I mean, we still have pesticides in Australia that we should not be using. Some mango farms and a few things, and they get in groundwater and they last a long time. But again, it's
is the purpose for that is just profit?
Yeah, they have no.
So we'll poison our own water, our own food. Fundamentally, that's it. It's the only way to make a living. So,
But glyphosate, I'm not against it. I understand farmers' needs for something, and they've tried many other measures, and hopefully science will find some other things. But, I've got a colleague scientist that is very, believes that glyphosate is a major reason for, our estuaries and oyster farm illness, oysters sickness and things like that.
Is anyone studying that?
Oh yeah, there's been, but none of it has been necessarily, I think, definitively shown. But again, it's about strictly complying with the label use of it. Just like sugarcane farmers have now got much better practices to stop runoff from their sugarcane farms, acid sulfate soils, which I've advised on, and things like that. All those sorts of practices. And again, this is all about sustainable living. I mean, so I'm not saying that, we should get rid of glyphosate and that it's, but, it is very much, they have to wear protective gear, and that people, just, Dad just sprays it around in the garden and doesn't, do any of those sorts of things. That's extremely important. Processed foods, as I say, and some other aspects of our society that are probably, problematic. I mean, it's all concentrated on smoking, smoking's one issue, but, I also...
Can I just go back? When you were on the biosecurity, was there political pressure on you at all or were you actually independent?
No, we provided advice, but
but you were allowed to actually be frank in your advice.
Oh yeah,
there wasn't. Okay.
Yeah.
And you said, were you on the TGA as well?
I was involved with the TGA in terms of label use for things in aquaculture and stuff like that.
With the TGA.
Oh yeah.
From some senators that they're funded by Big Pharma to a great degree, 98% or something. Wondering how independent they are. How did you find them when you worked with them?
TGA's had a very difficult history, in the it's and I'm not saying it's political so much as that it's just. And I'm not saying this is current, but at the time and for years afterwards, that they haven't been able to. I don't know that they've got the manpower and people to be able to actually do these proper assessments and various other things like that. So. Often they just follow the US FDA, and I think that was and probably still is part of the problem.
So it runs on trust then. They hope, trusting that their American colleagues.
Well, also that they don't have to go back, don't have time to go back necessarily. I mean, I know there's a review of some particular pesticides that I've been very concerned about for a long time, but they've been years, and yet they're banned in Europe and elsewhere, and So, you think, well, why is that? And I don't think it's political. I think it's just, what is it? What do you blame the sinister or the stuff up? And I think it's just a stuff up, and I
So
think
you
that's
think more incompetence or just the system's not... How about when we were out there, I remember you're very concerned of the way the country's heading. When we're talking about free speech and stuff like this. I mean, even this, all we're really doing is having a talk about science, about the country, about the health of our community. And, just, it's not like we're talking about bringing down the government or starting a revolution.
Absolutely
We're just
not.
talking about problems. And yet, here you are on a podcast that's heavily censored because for some reason, either the people or the government or want to control the information. They don't seem to like to be challenged at all.
Yeah, well, I think that's true. I mean, I knew Bruce Coates, which was, I worked with him in the dioxin issue, as I mentioned, in 1970 and 1995, I think, in the Wallace Lake hepatitis outbreak, which, killed some people, and a lot of people got hepatitis from oysters, and it was because of the depuration plants they were using, and a lot of that information was censored about how those oysters got infected. It was, another story, but
But why would they censor it? Is that to protect the industry, or?
Yeah, and protect the government.
The government.
They had a duty of care. There was a class action brought on against them, and things like that, and
in your view of working with the government will be more biased to protecting itself,
of course,
than will to so the human nature is that.
Yeah. And the other thing that I would say,
which is why we need strict regulations to control that weaker part of our nature. And
I think the other thing about our process here, and I'm not condemning all politicians, but my experience with the politicians, many of the politicians, that they go to university, they play cubby house politics, and then they get in the minister's office, and they have no real life experience. They don't have, science-based or technical-based backgrounds. And so you could look at the pink bat thing, for instance, that Kevin Rudd brought in. I mean, what a disaster that was. And any, electrician could have told them about the dangers of all of that. And politicians get on an agenda. He was all focused about climate change and things like that. So he brought in all of that and all of that disaster that occurred. It's the same thing at the moment, that the government is, in a situation where they've got, a minister for energy and things. What's his background in science and things like that? The same. It's across the board. And so
this must be really frustrating for you. But can I say, if you got a chance to come in and talk and be listened to, or what would you see as the way forward for Australia? Is it to free up science so that we can get huge scientific debates and free flowing of ideas, so we can actually identify problems and move forward? Or
I think I don't think it's about open and good communication. And I think particularly the thing that we need to do, and this is the thing that sort of depresses me, I guess, at this stage of my life, is that the youth have got to be, the education system, because if they are so fixed on this agenda, for instance, of climate change and things, that they don't allow people like myself to come and talk to students or have a curriculum that's like this. My stepmother complains that, she's a great ABC person and has supported the Greens and things. She says, well, why don't the ABC ever ask you to talk about, this?
Exactly right.
And I'm not, I'm not chasing them, but, that's...
No, but it's to have debate.
And again, I think that, if I was much younger and I was working in government and I did this, I probably wouldn't have a job, at the moment, because, I mean, if we hadn't learned from, Hitler and Goebbels and all of that about propaganda, then the things, and they get on these missions and they become so narrow focused that they cannot see the bigger picture, and that's one of the big issues.
So you're saying at the moment then, to be a scientist now, financially successful scientist, you can't actually be a scientist. Because you have to be leaning towards staying within narrative. Because if you go out of it, even if you're following the truth, you could end up being cancelled.
Well, I'll give you one quick final example. If you want to get research money, then you include climate change, then almost certainly you'll get funded. So, for instance, I had a colleague that was studying barnacles for a PhD, and she decided that she wanted to get funding, so she said, "Well, I'll study barnacles. They're important. Barnacles are important. They cost billions for shipping and things like that. And the anti-fouling agents and all the rest of it." But she just said, "Oh well," her title of her thesis was something barnacles and climate change, and she got the money.
That's it. Thanks. That's the first one. That was really great.
Good.